You'll have to forgive me. This is the very first time I've ever used a computer. Oh, you know what? This is not going to work because I can't hear you laughing.
Yes, you're unmuted.
Everybody's muted. Okay.
Aha!
Oh, very good. I appreciate that. Well, shall we commence? I've been waiting. So good to see everybody. A pre-Shabbat Shalom to you all. It's good to be all together, even though it's on Zoom. And I say even though it's on Zoom, because you don't know how much I miss seeing everybody panim el panim, face to face in synagogue. It's been 3 months since we've been able to, reunite in a normal scenario in the synagogue. I never took it for granted then, and I don't take it for granted now. But just to let you all know how much I miss being in synagogue and seeing everyone week in and week out, and for daily minyanim. It's truly a difficult time for everybody. And whoever would have thought that the technology that we have would be a wonderful thread, more than a thread, to hang on, that we get to see each other at least this way. Certainly socially distanced from each other, and I'll take this over nothing. So let's just pray that what we're all going through, gets out of our way, gets out of our hair, and that we can resume, not distancing, but where we can resume a normal sense of normalcy, going to the grocery store, going to the post office, going to your office, going to work, but most importantly, being able to be with everybody else. So last week, this is a great idea. Last week, we Rabbi Hassan and his wife, Rabbi Sharona Hassan, gave a very interesting take on part of the Perashah, as well as brought to light some very interesting ideas about religious objects that we use in our home, week in and week out. The rabbi's wife spoke about Hadlakat Nerot, and the rabbi spoke shortly thereafter about Kiddush and the actual Kiddush cup. And there were noted comments from many of you who were online and in the audience, so to speak, that said the first thing that came to mind was the sentimental value that some of those religious objects have in your home, whether the Kiddush cup was handed down from a previous generation or a previous loving relative.
They received it as a wedding gift.
Or they received it as a wedding gift, just something that was very sentimental. And I was thinking about it during the week, and I said, what motivates the association of a religious object that we use on a regular basis? And Rena and I do this all the time. We have objects in our home of a religious nature. It could be a siddur. It could be a recipe of a Jewish nature, a recipe that is of a traditional nature, of a bulema even. I shouldn't say even, but of something that is specific to our culture, or like I say, a religious object that recalls the previous generation. And I think it sounds like it's just, very cute, very sentimental, very emotional. But really, if you think about it and clear the fog, it is really an expression of minhag avotenu biyadenu, the customs and practices and the traditions of our forefathers are physically in our hands. Why would we conflate? Why would we bridge? Why would we associate religious objects with a loved one from the past, or even, God bless everybody, even if hopefully they're still with us, but with a loved one? And it's because it triggers the Torah, the tradition, the Mesorah that they taught us, expresses itself within us and comes out in the actual physical object. So I would like to continue a little bit about what we spoke last week. And of course, it had to do with Shabbat. these online presentations are very Shabbat oriented. And I would like to hopefully open up for discussion and get your thoughts on something that I think of from time to time about how the Jewish people, the Jewish nation views Shabbat. Regardless of your level of commitment or observance, I don't even like to use those words because,
Exactly.
Everybody does what they do according to their own abilities and commitment and devotion. But I don't think I've ever met a single Jewish person who said or who advocated or who complained about Shabbat. Think about it. Wherever you are, you could be in synagogue, you could be, walking, taking a leisurely walk, you could be in the middle of the week. Nobody complains about Shabbat. We complain about other things that we have to do. In fact, let me go to an extreme scenario. People fantasize, what if you found out, I don't know, just hypothetically, of course, that you weren't Jewish. The first thing that 21st century undeveloped mind Jewish person would say, wow, if that were the case, I love being Jewish, but you know what? I certainly would probably want to go to a few restaurants before I took the dive into getting back into being Jewish. That's a very cute and I have to say, with all due respect, quite a superficial approach. But you never hear anybody say, you know what? I would before I convert to Judaism, let me just have a few weeks of a free Shabbat. I've never heard it. I don't think it happens. So what is it about the Shabbat that so many Jewish people, regardless of how you observe it, embrace it? We all embrace Shabbat. It has to be more than just a day off of work. And it has to be more than just the delicious food that we all partake with Shabbat. And benditas manos, my wife is amongst the best of the bakers and cooks in the Sephardic community. No, you're welcome. Thank you. So it has to be more than that. What is it about the Shabbat? And what is it about the Shabbat that when it is upon us, specifically when it's at our doorstep on Friday evenings, just before sunset, that something, for lack of a better word, magical occurs in the Jewish home, that Shabbat is upon us? What actually happens? But before you answer your question, I open that to a discussion, I want to inject another component to the question, which actually brought me to ask this question. In other words, is it really something in the air? Is there something intrinsic on a Friday evening? Something intrinsic in the environment? Is it something in the expanse, in the clouds, in the air, in the day, in the environment? Or is it something that we create? And what makes me ask the question even more precisely, is that I came across a Jewish law. And it first struck me as very strange, but you have to listen very carefully so you can follow the punchline, so to speak. There is in the Shulchan Aruch that if heaven forbid, somebody is wandering in the desert or in the forest, and God forbid they get lost, and they no longer know what day of the week it is. They started maybe on a Sunday, and they had a good time, compass went haywire, and they lost track of what day of the week it is. And now you are no longer certain what day is Shabbat. What do you do? So the halacha, the law, tells us to do a certain calculation. You take the first day, without going into detail, you recount the first day that you're aware of, and you count a certain amount of days, and establish a Shabbat. And you establish basically a subjective Shabbat. So it could be very possible that your new Shabbat day is Shabbat for you on Gilligan's Island, but it's really Wednesday in the rest of the world. So therefore, I concluded it's a bit arbitrary when Shabbat is, and it's very subjective. So the special feeling, the special magic, the special sanctity that comes upon us on Shabbat, is it in the environment or is it self-perpetuated, self-created? Certainly, I think it's subjective, but I would be very interested in opening up unmuting everybody and getting your thoughts on this. Am I all washed up? Or do you have thoughts that might be able to, I think I have an answer, but I would certainly love to hear everybody's or whoever is willing to join in.
Everyone, so people can share. So feel free to unmute yourselves.
Just as I thought.
I mean, I always find it fascinating because I've lived all over the world. When it's Shabbat in Australia, it's still not Shabbat anywhere else. And then sometimes you're in when we were in Hawaii, and realizing how late you're starting Shabbat, where it's almost over other places. So it definitely resonates to me, this whole idea of you make it Shabbat. And it really is subjective. It's when you hold it Shabbat, especially when you bring in Shabbat early in the summer. You know, you can see friends driving around, they're bringing in Shabbat 2 or 3 hours later, but it's Shabbat already for us, that we define it. As soon as we say it's Shabbat now, everything comes to a change. There's a switch in the brain there, and we're already ready to feel Shabbat.
It's not the brain. The switch isn't in the brain. The switch is in the neshama. It's in the soul. That's where it changes.
You know, I'll tell you something else that you might, I find this interesting. Some of you might have heard it if you've been around Rena and my Shabbat table on a Friday night. I often like to, whether we're among friends or whatever, I often like to share something that maybe I discovered during the week while I was reading something, or often, I love being comical, as many of you know, share humorous stories. This one wasn't so humorous, but it's certainly related to Shabbat, and I think you might even laugh. Many years ago, I found myself in China, and I was there for business, and I just had to go for 4 days. And my dear wife, at the time, was a travel agent. So I says, Rena, I just got to go into Hong Kong, but I want to be home by Shabbat. I was leaving on Sunday, and I want to be home, you know, for Shabbat. I just need to go in, do what I need to do, and come back. So we booked the ticket, and we found a ticket. It was very reasonable, and it happened, and we both looked at it, and it said, great, we'll be back. This one gets back into Seattle. You leave Sunday morning, and you'll get back to Seattle 11 a.m. Friday morning. I go, that's great. Well, I have plenty of, you know, it was summertime. During the Omer, the sun was setting late. I said, that's just great. So I went to China for 4 days. All of a sudden, I'm at the airport, and I must have been, you know, just not aware or conscious or conscientious, I should say, of scheduling and timing. So I get to the airport in Hong Kong on Friday morning, and my flight, I think, was leaving at 11 or 12. Plenty of light, and I'm coming back to Seattle. And getting in at 11 a.m. Friday morning, the same day. So I'm on the plane, and wonderful time. I'm looking, and all of a sudden it dawned on me that it started getting dark outside. And this was Friday, leaving China. And I said, oh my gosh, I think I made a mistake, and that I'm gonna actually be on the plane over Shabbat, because by the time the sun sets, it will be, you know, as you go east from China back to, or over the poles coming back to Seattle, you're going to gain hours. And gain hours. And so I turned to the flight attendant and I go, can you tell me when the sun is going to set? She goes, sir, the plane is traveling very fast, and where we are on the map, the sun is going to set very quickly, and I will have only been on the plane for 3 or 4 hours. Like, oh my gosh, it's going to be Shabbat and I won't be in Seattle. Then I remembered I'm going to be crossing the international date line, and the international date line sets you back 24 hours. So Friday night on the plane at 11 p.m. became Thursday night on the plane at 11 p.m. My point is, whether I made a mistake, I don't know. Is the international date line just is it arbitrary? Oh yes. So just to thank you, Rena. Just to be safe, I took Shabbat. In other words, I was sitting in my seat in row 7F, and I didn't say kiddush or anything, and I didn't ask people in the plane to please rise while I say kiddush and Shabbat shalom to the flight attendants, and things were moving so fast. It didn't occur. And the flight attendant was very nice. She even went and asked the captain where we were longitudinally, so I know where we're going. But just to be safe, I took my wallet out and put it in the seat rest. I didn't use the restroom, so the light wouldn't go on when you open the door. And but my point is for a few moments, it actually felt like it actually felt like it was Shabbat on Cathay Pacific before it turned Thursday morning and came to Friday morning and came to Seattle. But the question goes back: what is it that makes our Shabbat? I've spoken a lot. So again, anybody who has any thoughts, Rabbi Hassan gave a beautiful reply, and of course I have my own answer, but please.
I'm sorry, Frank, I need to hear the end of the story. So it's Shabbat, and then 2 hours later it's not Shabbat, or? The first thing we need to, you talk about on the airplane? Yeah. So first thing we need to determine is, does the international date line have a Jewish legal component such that it makes Shabbat, no matter whether you're in a flying saucer or you happen to be on land and you happen to cross over, you're on a boat rather, or on a ship. I never found out the answer. I was just more concerned. But what happens on the plane on a calendar, I can't say in the world, but on a calendar, you go back 24 hours. So at that time, let's say the plane at 10 p.m. crossed China time, crossed the international date line, it immediately reverted 24 hours back within an instant. So, right, I just didn't know if that meant you had the shortest Shabbat ever.
I probably did, and so I was gonna do kiddush going down the left side of the plane, and then say Havdalah coming up the right side of the plane.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. It was the shortest Shabbat ever. Anyone else? So my answer, if I may share with you, is, and Rabbi Hassan more than alluded to it, is we make it that way. And why I brought up the rabbis and the Rubissa's points last week, because it is through the embracing of those religious objects, making the candles as beautiful as they can be, making the Kiddush cup and associating it with the most beautiful part of our lives, it's called Hidur Mitzvah. We enhance the mitzvah, we enhance what we do, and that is a mood setter. And that's, obviously it's each week we have the association that the previous week was, thank God, beautiful, and we pray for each week to be that much more sweet, that much more beautiful, that much more enhanced. And it's really us through our actions that create the Shabbat as we know it. And this speaks volumes because God gave us the mitzvot, Asher Kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav. He sanctified us. I have always viewed the mitzvot as gifts to us rather than things that harness us or that are restrictive. Because without them, this is why I go back to nobody, no matter how restrictive Shabbat is, I've not met any Jewish person
who said, let's do away with Shabbat. I'd love not to have one Shabbat and just be able to do whatever I want. And I think that speaks volume for the Jewish nation at large. So thank you for your thoughts and comments and questions, even if you didn't express them. I saw them in your eyes, so that's.
Can I add something?
Yes.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. I was just asking if I could add something to that.
Please.
Sure. I guess I was thinking about also like the aspect of kavanah, just to have intention into like the direction of heart and like your mind in one in doing that, because I feel like you can also do Shabbat. It becomes a rote to a degree, even if you're embracing objects, but really like to fully feel the Shabbat. I don't know. I feel like there's a complete difference when it's like it's like when if you did like a meditation versus not. I feel like it really enhances. So it's like that trigger, that click within to click into the soul or whatnot.
That's right.
Your brain.
No, Yosef, you're correct. 100% correct, which is why our sages used to meditate an hour. According to the Mishnah, they would meditate an hour before engaging in prayer. Could you imagine doing that today? Synagogue starts at 8:30, but you get there at 7:30, and for Shabbat, for example, and put your mind in the mood, in the right frame of mind that you can concentrate and have and I'm glad you translated the word kavanah as intent, because kavanah is you have to be, we can't be automatonic. We have to have intent. So very good comment. Just a real quick shout out. I see that our 3 daughters, Sally, Marie, and Gina, are online. Thank you for staying up. They're in New Jersey.
Yeah, but what time is it there? Is it Shabbat yet?
It's not Shabbat. In China.
Yeah. So Frank?
Yes.
When Yosef was talking and which you were responding, the idea of kavanah also has a meaning of alignment. So it's the intention and the feeling and everything coming together. It's not having only intention, but I think it's also there's alignment. There's everything is coming together in one way.
Sure. Very good.
If I could just, okay, so I'm Susie, and I just, and I'm in Rehovot. So for me, it's 6 in the morning.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. That's why I ran to get my cup of coffee. Yeah, so I just have to tell you that when I light candles, and right now my house is not ready for Shabbat, but when I light candles, I have behind me, I'm sitting in front of my, where I light candles, and this picture was given to me of a mother lighting candles, was given to me by my mother-in-law, may she rest in peace. And then I just took off, and then I have my mother's candlesticks that I use, which are just plain old little ceramic candlesticks, but my mom used them, and so I love to have that. May she rest in peace. And then I also have this picture of my children right behind me that I think about. The only person, I'm sure that I would embarrass her if she heard me say this, but the only person that ever told me that about Shabbat was when I was trudging along with my maybe 4 or 5-year-old girl in a very, very hot climate to go to someone's house in the morning, and she said to me, when I grow up, I'm not doing this anymore. It's too hot. And I said to her, well, you know, when you grow up and you're an Ima and you have your own daughters, then you can decide what you're going to do. But as long as you're in my house, I'm going to teach you what I think is right. So I will tell you the end of that story in 1 second, but I just want to tell you the other object that I always keep with me for Shabbat, at least in my own house, is, I don't know if any of you were raised on Ketantan stories. Do any of you know this story?
I've heard of it.
He was the Jewish Tom Thumb. And so my mother, who I was totally, and my children have heard Ketantan stories, my grandchildren have heard Ketantan stories. And so this is Ketantan, who also sits near my candlesticks, and this is a little tiny doll that my mother had made older than my children now, or almost older than them all. And there's someone that she knew crocheted little clothes on him, and he has his own Kiddush cup, and on all my grandchildren now play with him. Anyway, so the end of the story is that poor little girl who was trudging along in the heat is your own Ravisa. And so now, of course, she has raised her children, her daughters, in a wonderful way, and I'm sure that she teaches them all kinds of, I know, not I'm sure, that she and Rabbi teach their children all kinds of wonderful ways, and I'm sure that their children will never say to them, "This is so hot."
Well, that's why we ended up in Seattle. We're never going to complain about it being too hot.
No problems here. Thank you for sharing that. That is full circle.
Yeah, definitely.
Before I go to the next topic of discussion, or hopefully discussion, this weekend, in years past when we were youngsters, would be the first weekend as kids. We'd go to, as soon as school was over, the very first Shabbat, we'd go to camp. And there was no break. School was out on Wednesday or Thursday. Camp started the following Sunday. And I always remember as a child, it would always be this Perashah Shelach Lecha. And that we're going to read this Perashat, God willing, this Shabbat. Right? Yeah. And, because we're not in sync with Shabbat, Israel's 1 week ahead and we're 1 week back because of the holiday. But has a very special portion in this Perashah. And it speaks of, and I'm always just so focused on these kinds of things. And I try to research them further because they just intrigue me. And this Perashah has the portion of Tzitzit, the mitzvah of, on four corners, we have to put these tassels. Now, where does that, what is the basis for that mitzvah? I mean, I know there are many mitzvot, there are many precepts for which we don't know the reasons, but I don't think tzitzit comes into the category of one of those kinds of mitzvot like para aduma, where certain issues of tum'ah and tahara, where sometimes we just can't put our finger on the spot. But tzitzit, something that we engage in every day. There's even an opinion that some women can wear tzitzit. Obviously it's not our tradition, and where it falls in the Perashah is also very strange and curious. So the Perashah tells us, God tells Moses, speak to Moshe, speak to the children of Israel, and have them put tzitzit, which we don't even know what it means. We'll call it tassels or fringes, al kanfei vigdehem, on the corners of their garments. But tell me, does kanfei mean corner? What does kanaf mean in Hebrew? Wings. A kanaf, al kanfei nesharim, on the wings of eagles. Where do we get corners from kanaf? And furthermore, it mandates that we actually put a strand of blue, of a blue color amongst these strings, amongst these tassels, on the corner or wherever. And then it concludes with Lama'an tizkeru, in order that you shall remember and do all of the mitzvot, and that God took us out of Egypt, and our sages tell us that we have to look at the tzitzit, and then we have to remember something, and then we have to do something. And the Talmud tells us the very same thing. Re'iyah mevi'ah lidei zechira, and zechira mevi'ah lidei asiyah. Seeing brings us to remembering, and remembering brings us to doing. So what are the tzitzit? What are these? How did this symbolic, more than symbolic, it's a mitzvah. what is the symbol? What might be the symbolism behind it? So we hear things. Yeah, the blue is supposed to remind us of Shamayim, of the skies, and of the. We can look at the numerical value. If you add up the knots and the 8 strands and the word tzitzit, you'll get to 613, and we'll remember the mitzvot and we'll do the mitzvot. But I was reading something very interesting. And for those of you who are studying with Rabbi Hassan, I don't know if you've gotten to the part in Sefer Shemuel, in the book of Samuel, where Saul, S-A-U-L, King Shaul HaMelech, was in pursuit of David, who was not yet the king. And David, you know, it was quite contentious. And when Saul went into a cave, it was not unbeknownst to him, David was lurking somewhere inside that cave, hiding. And when Saul wasn't looking, David, a kind of an enemy at this time, went to the garment that Saul had took off, his outer garment, and on the hem of that robe that he was wearing, David went without authority and ripped it. He made a tear into Saul, the king's robe. Afterwards, when they both discovered what occurred, they each had a very unique reaction. Saul's reaction was, and it says in the Navi, it says in the book of Samuel, now I know that David will be king. What, from a tear of your clothing, now you know that David is going to be the king? Similarly, David had a reaction equally as strange, and he was filled with remorse. He says, what did I do that for? Why? There was a great transgression that I tore the hem of King Saul's garment. I was not commanded to do so by God. I did it on my own, and he was filled with regret. I granted, it wasn't a nice thing to do, but and even the commentators have trouble with this narrative. What was the big deal? I mean, yes, it was wrong. And what would prompt King Saul to say, through this, now I see, David, you're going to be David HaMelech. So a very interesting thing I read, and it said that the hem in antiquity was a sign of your honor, your wealth, your affluence, and your standing. And the more ornate your hem was on the garment that you were wearing, the more wealthy, the more affluent, the more prominent you were in that specific community. And they even said, and that would be a reason why King Saul said, you have marred a very significant component of this beged, of my robe that you wear. I now see you're going to be king. And similarly, King David's regret also would match that. Why did I touch that very holy part that's untouchable? What did I do? Well, what does all this have to do with tzitzit? This has to do with tzitzit because there is an opinion that the tzitzit were actually innovation. Obviously, it's a mitzvah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's obviously one of 613 mitzvot. I don't need to take that away one moment, but it can have a symbolism that we might not understand this day, that in those days, a tassel on your hem was only for the wealthy. And the blue that you put on, the techelet, that you would have to enwrap those tzitzit with, was only affordable by the very wealthy, insofar that they knew that where do you get that techelet? You get that techelet from, I forgot the technical name, but it's a type of snail that resides in the waters off of the northern coast of Israel and Lebanon, and it's a dye, D-Y-E, it's a dye, that it takes 12,000 snails to make 1.4 grams of this color, of this dye. So no wonder it was only reserved for the wealthy. And it made this beautiful blue shade that you'll see on some tzitziot today. And that, you might conjecture where the term royal blue came from, because it was only worn by the upper echelon of society. And then here comes the Torah and tells us we have to put this beautiful blue, royal blue on our tzitzit that is only reserved for those who can afford it, for the affluent, for the wealthy, because God, as he told us in the Parashat Yitro, in the book of Exodus, right before we read the 10 Commandments, he said he wanted the Jewish people to be everyone a priest. Mamlechet Kohanim vegoy kadosh. The playing field is level. There is no hierarchy. We're not measured by our wealth. We're not measured by our standing in the community. Every Jew shall have royalty and a dignity to them. And I will conclude with a very touching story, and then I will open it up, if we still have time, Rabbi, to open it up to any comments that you might have. But I ran across this. It was written by a gentleman who I'll tell you his name after I read it. It will take about 3 minutes to read, but please listen carefully, because I think it's moving and it speaks volumes to our credit as a Jewish people. This person entered a synagogue on Yom Kippur and then recorded these words. That which revealed itself to me at that moment was not at all the Jewish religion. It was the Jewish people. The spectacle of that large number of men assembled, their shoulders covered by a talet, suddenly disclosed to my eyes a far-off past. At first, on seeing the talet uniformly worn by all the participants in the service, I felt that in a way they were all officiating. It seemed to me that this silent assembly was in expectancy of something to happen, a spirit of acceptancy and faith in the future which stamps its entire people with a special seal. In fact, in the synagogue service, all Jews are equal. All are priests. All may participate in the holy functions, even officiate in the name of the entire community when they have the required training. The dignity which distinguished the chacham, the doctor, the sage, is not a clerical degree, but rather one of learning and of piety quickened through knowledge. The talet would have given me the understanding of that peculiarity of Judaism, which would have escaped me had my attention not been captured from the first by the spectacle so new to me of a multitude of people in white prayer shawls. It is thus that rites and symbols often constitute a more expressive language than the best of discourses. This person who wrote this was so moved by the vision, by the spectacle of a synagogue filled with people enwrapped, embraced by their talitot, by their talet, that he absolutely gave credit not to the religion, but to the people who embody the religion, the Jewish people. This person was not Jewish. His name was Aimé Pellier, and this was back in the early 20th century, in the early 1900s. And he was a French Catholic preparing for the priesthood. And this impressed upon him, this spectacle, this vision impressed upon him what the Jewish people were made of. It's precisely ve'atem tiyuli mamlechet kohanim begoy kadosh, just like God proclaimed that he wanted every Jew to be equal. Every one of us has an opportunity to be a priest, to be a leader, to be an officiant, and we are, by virtue of how we conduct our lives, and by virtue going back to the very beginning of tonight's visit, by the beautiful symbolisms, whether it be the Hadlakat Neirot, whether it be the Kiddush cup and the Kiddush in it, and the recitation of Kiddush, and our embracing of Shabbat that we create, that we embrace, and by wearing a talet that we enwrap ourselves and assume the position of we're all brethren. We're all in a way kohanim. We're all priestly in our actions. So I found this to be quite profound, quite moving, and I think it kind of gives colors, no pun intended, to the mitzvah of tzitzit that God, Hakadosh Baruch Hu, God Almighty commanded us, that they're not just empty, that perhaps they have quite a narrative behind them, they have quite a history behind them that sheds light on each and every action that we do. And silence befalls us.
I have a question.
Yes.
Where do women enter into this?
Well, they're part of the Jewish nation, so they were not singled out for also being of equal priestly nature. And women are not forbidden, as I mentioned before, they're not forbidden to wear a talit. They just don't. They don't have the same obligation to do so, and it's not our tradition. But it's certainly the mandate and the symbolism behind the mandates are not specific. The message is not gender specific.
Thank you.
Very quiet. Yes, and if anybody, we did last week a pizmon. I thought maybe we'll do a pizmon for Shabbat, and then we can call it an evening as we get ready for Mincha Nervi. Unless Rabbi, you have anything?
No,
to add?
I'd love to hear a pizmon. What are you thinking of? What are you thinking of?
Well, what's that? This one I would like to do because tonight is the Mildado. Tonight and tomorrow is the Mildado for our dear Rabbi Meinman, Alav HaShalom, and he affected and influenced so many of us, and it was his love of life and love of people and love of symbolism and love of the religious objects that was so contagious, such that, I recall even in the past years, going back to 1964 when I was a kid at camp, I vividly remember him, everything that how he was so animated, and how much we benefited from him being a leader for so many years in our community. So I'm not looking at you, I'm trying to find it, the Pizmon in the book. Here we are, page 193, if you have it. I'm just gonna do one stanza. There's no other day like Shabbat. Not in the English that Rabbi Meinman taught us, but in the traditional Hebrew. It's on page 196. I'm just going to sing the first stanza because it's very long, and I love this song, because I associate it with him in the English form and in the Hebrew form, but it's a pizmon that has chazanut. It has the makam richly surrounding it, like no other pizmon. And for those of you interested, it's makam ajem, which is what we do much of the Friday night service in, and obviously it's into usher. And we do it at weddings. We use ajem at weddings and Shabbat. Probably for Shabbat Kala and Kala Shabbat. It's all connected. So page 196, if you'd like to follow along, as Rabbi Hassan said last week, very difficult to sing along in unison on Zoom because there's that delay. So I hope you enjoy. Miyom Rishon ad Yom Shishi Likerat Shabbat Nichsefa Nafshi Kivet Shabbat Etzei Chofshi Etzei Chofshi V'chiyom Menucha Ekraehu Yom HaShabbat En Kamohu En Kamohu Berecho Elohim Vaykadesh. So as I sing it, I envision the memories of my youth and Rabbi Maimon singing it in English with his hands, and Al was doing it. I don't know if you all saw, there's no other day like Shabbat. But let me just translate it before we close.
Frank,
yes.
Can you just do Ein Kamohu again, not the whole paragraph, but Ein Kamohu, and everybody has a chance to do that. We can do the hand motions in unison.
Oh. Yes. En Kamohu, En Kamohu, Berecho Elohim, Vaykadesh. Beautiful words. We'll close with a translation of it. This first paragraph is beautiful because really it just speaks the truth about everything that we were saying, how special Shabbat is to us. Miyom Rishon, from Sunday ad Yom Shishi until Friday, Likrat Shabbat, we look forward to call out for the Shabbat. Nichsefa nafshi, our souls yearn for it, they desire it, they want it. Our souls just want Shabbat. Ki b'Shabbat etzei chofshi, because on the Sabbath, we go out free. So Shabbat is far from restrictive. It's the opposite of restriction. It is the ultimate of freedom because you are free to pursue that which lasts, that which stays within the neshama, namely observance of mitzvot, the study of Torah, and the observance, of course, of Shabbat. V'chi yom menucha ekraehu, and for it is a day of rest that we call out for it. Yom HaShabbat, the day of the Sabbath day, En Kamohu. There is not another day in the week that even comes close to it. There's nothing like the day of Shabbat. Berecho Elohim, God blessed it, Vaykadesh, and He sanctified it. And we are the beneficiaries of that blessing and sanctification from Almighty God. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you all so much for coming into our virtual home and our Zoomed home, and have a beautiful Shabbat. May we all reunite together soon in person in the best of health and in the best of good tidings. Shabbat Shalom.
I want to thank you, Frank.
Shabbat Shalom. That was
a pleasure.
Beautiful.